kind of like fancy advertisement, then what should Samsung Galaxy should do? That is contingency. iPhone never comes with a fancy advertisement. Chinese mobile phone company never has the technology to follow up the Samsung. But that might happen. Something that might happen, and might happen, might not happen. But you still think about it. Then, if it really happens, other people say, "Oh, I never thought that Chinese would follow us. I would never thought that Japanese would invade, bomb the Pearl Harbor." But if you are American soldier who thought about Japanese might bomb the Pearl Harbor in the World War II, you know what I mean? Then you'd be better prepared when Japanese invade you, because the fact you thought it over, you don't have time to think it and coming out a solution, you already have a solution, things like that. So this contingency, what might happening, may not, small probability, but still, if you think about it during weekends, then I'm assuring you, you would be the elite member of that society. But anyway, these contingencies may be considered, maybe not be considered, maybe in the contract or not. But here, for individuals, these contingencies are very unlikely to happen. But what, from the government point of view, this will happen. The Korean government has 50 million members, Koreans living there. And even though for every Koreans the probability is 0.1%, when you have 50 million people in Korea, it's going to be happening to at least 10% people every year. So what Korean government should do is, it never have the false imagination that this might never happen in Korea. It should be thinking every possible contingency would happen and will happen, because we have so many people living in Korea. So a contract, even though the individual contract does not mention about the contingency, because it's very unlikely to be happening, the government should have some rule to deal with it. And the default rule, when you buy a computer, you can specify for the display and the saving space and everything, if you're an expert. But you say, "Oh, I don't want to bother myself." What is the default rule? Which means if you do not specify, the computer company say, "Oh, this is the general setting. If you don't want to bother yourself to specify it, this is yours." So kind of the government contract law plays the role of default rule. If the Yonsei University and Professor Han do not want to bother about these small probability contingencies, you don't have to. But if these contingencies actually happen, we government already thought about it, and we have something called contract law, which would play the role of gap. The gap in your contract would be filled by government pre-prepared default rule, whose name is contract law. So why we have such a enormous volume of contract law? Because government think about all these unlikely contingencies and make a rule out of it, so that even though the individuals left gaps in their contract, when that contingency actually happened, they come to the government to look at the contract law, and the contract law should say, "Okay, because you left a gap, the default rule is this." So I believe this time the government didn't prepare, but if there is a contract law about coronavirus, government said, "Okay, Yonsei University, Professor Han, you never made a contract, but at this moment, Professor Han doesn't have to teach offline." Or Professor Han got sick, cannot teach, only the Japanese professor can teach. The government says the Yonsei University does not have to bring that Japanese professor from Japan, but anybody who is replaceable in Yonsei University can teach it, even though his major is not law and economics, so he's not as good a teacher as Professor Han, but still the student should put up with that. But Yonsei University should not charge higher tuition to the student and things blah blah blah. So I hope the government has these rules. Probably they do. So once again, the contract law should be easy because basically the government enforce whatever the private individuals make an agreement. Problem is there are so many contingencies with very small probability. So people stop agreeing on things because the transaction cost of negotiation. So there are so many gaps, but then the gaps would be a problem at least to some member of the country, the nation. So as a nation, the government should prepare every contingency, should have a very thick standardized contract in them so that when the gap really happened, people can come to that contract, the standardized default contract, to figure out what they would do, unless they prepared in advance. Once again, unlikely for the individual, but certainty for the government. Okay, we are going to continue with the default rule in lecture 29. See you soon. Thank you. We are in the middle of week 9.